Good afternoon and welcome to Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. There's a phrase we're fond of using around here, and that's television is a team sport. For everyone you see on screen, there are about 10 people behind the scenes that make us look good. This summer, it has been our privilege to host a UVM undergraduate through the UVM Extension internship program. Kate Lewton began with us earlier this summer. Here she is on her first day of the job getting some video of cows. And Kate joins me in the studio today. And the last time we saw each other, we were working at a cow barn. It was hot and smelly and we were wearing protective booties on our feet. And so it's good to see you under much less adverse conditions.
You too.
All right, and so you're a student at UVM. Why don't you tell me a little about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a rising junior at UVM. I'm a film and television studies major, and then I also have a minor in reporting and documentary storytelling, and then public communications. But I'm from Stowe, Vermont, originally from Connecticut, but
Great,
I've been in the area.
You're learning a ton of different things.
Yeah.
That's great. And why did you decide to go to UVM?
The in-state tuition was pretty good.
All right. Okay.
My parents went to UVM, so it's always kind of been like in the background, and it's just a good location. And it's convenient, and it's a nice school.
Great, and now let's talk a little bit about your work with Across the Fence. Why did you choose this internship?
Yeah, so I got an email. I was out to dinner and I was like, oh, what's this? And it was an email about these summer job opportunities. And I had just enrolled in CALS for the PCOM major. And it was a CALS email, which is like the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. So it was kind of something different than what I've been used to. But it just talked about the internship, and I thought it sounded interesting because I had never really done anything in the news sphere. I thought that would be cool to explore over the summer. And I thought that the kind of structure of it also seemed like a good fit 'cause it was part-time and it was paid. And it just seemed like a cool opportunity to have, so I applied.
So it started as all great things in an Outlook inbox.
Yeah.
All right, and why don't you tell me a little bit about what you've learned while you've been on the job?
Yeah, so I've done a few things. My biggest thing going in was editing that I wanted to work on. That's tricky, but it's also really fundamental for my major and my classes, so I wanted to practice that. So I would say editing with Keith has been a really big thing, and Ben. I've done a few things for Ben the last 2 weeks, little tasks that have helped me kind of understand software more and things like that. And I would also say I've just learned about how the shoots function, how this functions itself. So it's been cool to see all of the prep time that goes into these shows. And Keith and Ben and Caleb really are a team that gets a lot done in a really quick period of time. So that's been really impressive to see.
Absolutely. And how do you think your time with this internship is going to help the rest of your college career at UVM?
I think that the editing sphere will definitely help. I have a few classes this fall where I'm going to have to be using Premiere Pro, which is the editing software, things like that. And so I think that I'll bring my new knowledge to the teacher I already had and hopefully impress her. But I think just that, and also just the camera stuff, it's been cool to use these big, professional cameras and kind of understand how those work. And it's going to be easy to apply that on a smaller scale for my classes. And I think just I'm taking a production class this fall, so I think that class will have a lot of similar stuff to what Keith and Ben and Caleb do here and what you do in your day job. So I think that it'll be nice to see have an understanding of what goes into a real life situation that I'm learning in my class.
Absolutely. And you grew up in Vermont, but you didn't grow up on a farm. Why do you think it's important for UVM students to get off campus and see the rest of the state?
Yeah, I think that growing up in Stowe and just living in Burlington, it's kind of like a bubble, and there's a lot to the rest of the state that you don't see. And I think that Vermont's history is super interesting too, considering it is so agriculturally based. My mom grew up on a dairy farm, and so I've always had this slight connection to that area and ways of life. But I think going into this internship, it helped me see just how not dependent Burlington or Vermont still is on it, but agriculture and farming still is such a big part of Vermont life. And I think that living in Burlington, college students kind of forget that, and we go to school in Vermont, we might as well understand what goes into it and how we can actually get out of UVM and help the state and help these people that are born and raised here.
Sure, and Extension and Across the Fence is all part of UVM.
Yeah.
And I can say for myself, working in this, I've learned a lot about all that UVM does. Have you learned a lot more about the college you attend by doing this?
Yeah, I obviously am in the film major, so I don't see a lot of what UVM has, but I think the coolest thing I saw, I didn't realize we had so many farming areas and the horticulture farm, things like that we went to. I didn't know those off-campus things existed. And I think it's just really cool that UVM has those resources for students to go out and have like that real world practice. I was editing something for Ben on like Centennial Woods, which I hadn't gone to, and I got to learn about the initiatives they have for students in like building the trails and kind of helping with like invasive species. So I think just seeing like the other areas of study is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do your friends and family think of your internship? Did they know anything about fence before you started?
Yeah, so my mom, her family is from Chelsea, which is a small town, which hopefully some know, in Vermont. And I was telling my grandmother, who used to run the dairy farm, about what I was doing. And she was like, oh, look, I always watched that. And a few of my mom's extended family members also have watched it. So they recognized it. My dad was like, what is that? But I've been telling my like roommates and friends about it. And they're like, oh, like, what did you do today? And I was like, oh, I was at a cow farm. I like pet a cow with ringworm, but things like that. So it's been cool to like tell my friends about like all these things that I've been doing, and just that there's like, you know, there's a lot to it.
Absolutely, and there are a lot of challenges as well to working in something like television. What have you found maybe the most difficult about your work so far?
I think like I don't know if I found it difficult, but I think like watching Ben and Keith, it's interesting to see like how much of a time crunch they're under. Like editing takes so long, which I knew going into it, but I think like seeing them actually sit down and do it, and all of the prep that goes into it, like organizing like the sequences and like the clips and the selects and all those things, I think that it just gives me like a bigger appreciation just how much detail goes into like a simple program. And I think that I, even like doing my small little task for them, had like felt that. And so I think that that's just like a really impressive thing to see them do, and a big challenge of like doing things yourself like that, editing things yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, I can say for myself, I've only been out on a couple in the field shoots with them, and you see the finished project and it looks amazing, but the amount of work that goes into it behind the scenes is incredible. Yeah. And I mean, your work as well. I've seen you do a number of things in the field.
Yeah.
So speaking of that, you work a lot behind the scenes. Is that something you want to keep doing, or would you be interested in doing something more on this side of the camera?
Yeah, I think behind the scenes stuff. When I was younger, I thought that being in front of the camera, I had like some theater and stuff was fun, but I think behind the scenes is kind of where I want to stay. I really like screenwriting, so I'm hoping to kind of go into that sphere after college.
Great.
Yeah.
And you already touched on this a little bit, but what are some key things that you think you're really going to take away from this experience?
I think just editing, understanding how important it is for collaboration. I think that seeing how Ben, Keith, and Caleb all work together to get things done is really important. And I also think too, just like seeing how Keith goes out into like these shoots and how he kind of interacts with the people that he's working with, I think is also really cool to see. I think just the importance of building relationships with the people that you're working with and like interviewing. That way you can kind of get more out of what you're doing with them and more of what you're actually talking to them about. I think like that connection is really important to see.
And we actually first met at the UVM horticulture farm doing an on-site shoot there. How does working in the field compare to the post-production, and do you have a preference between the two?
I think the field work was definitely a first for me, which was cool to see. I think I kind of preferred that a bit, just like meeting people. I like talking to people, and I think that social aspect is something that I really appreciated, and also just like dictating it in real time versus kind of when you're editing, you got what you got, and it's more of like a make something with what you have, whereas in the field you kind of dictate it all and you get to like make real-time decisions.
Sure, you have more creative control over what you're working with later on. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of different components of working in television, and in the past you've done some video archival work, and how is that different from your work here with Fence?
Yeah, I took a class last semester on archival work, and a lot of that was going in and using like understanding how fair use laws work and kind of repurposing like old analog footage. So I went and I bought lots of like old 16 millimeter, Super 8 millimeter reels and would shoot those off the wall and edit them. And I also used content from like an online database of public domain stuff. And that was really interesting because that you're stuck with like the things that already exist, and you kind of have to make your own meaning out of pre-existing work. And then with this, obviously you kind of get to control your shooting and make your own story. So I think it's cool just like finding the stories in both, but with one you have things that you have to work with, and one you kind of choose what you want.
And speaking of working on stories, you actually were working on a shoot with Caleb, another one of our students in the production staff, and that's going to air in a couple weeks, but can you tell us a little bit what you were working on?
Yeah, so Caleb and I went to 4-H Safety Day, I think, at the UVM farm, and we followed a group of students or youth around that were involved in like showing in 4-H and things like that. And I think that itself was interesting because I got to like see what that actual like community looks like. I had no exposure to it, but we followed around these kids and got to see like, you know, kind of how they interact with it. But I think it was interesting because we were interviewing kids, and I think when you're interviewing kids, that's also just its own beast to do. But it was just interesting to talk to them and kind of shoot things ourselves and kind of get to choose like what we wanted in it, because Keith left a lot of control up to Caleb and I. So I think it was just cool to like have that own independence on the shoot.
So have you been working on editing that together now?
Caleb is.
Nice.
Caleb is, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And you actually mentioned interviewing kids as well. From your experience, what are some tips you have for interviewing?
I think Caleb and I learned very quickly that day that you can't ask yes or no questions because they'll just say yes or no. But I think just trying to like get them to go into detail is tough. So trying to like poke at something that's exciting or they really like, they'll tend to talk more on. But I think just avoiding those really simple, basic questions.
Yeah, you're not going to get a lot of great sound when they're like, yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, you're going into your junior year, so you've still got a little more time left in school. But are you thinking that this industry is something you want to stick with after graduation?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think that's something in like the film and television sphere would be my ideal. Really anything, I'm not picky, but I think just like something in there, it's such a cool and like unique industry that doesn't really compare to like a lot of other fields.
Yeah, well, does that mean you'd be interested in working in news?
Potentially. I think that I kind of like the idea of like writing my own stories and things like that, but I also think too, through this internship, I found that like you can find your own narrative in real world stories. So I think that, yeah, I could see myself working in news.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And that takes care of our program for today. I want to thank the crew behind the scenes here at WCAX. I'm Jolie Whitney. Have a good one.